Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Rachel Barenbaum. And Rachel is she's not a debut author. She has written another book in the past. For readers unfamiliar with your work, how would you describe what you write?
Well, I have two books, right? So we have Atomic
Oh,
Anna, right? Woo, right here, which is my first book, my second book, sorry, the book that we're here to talk about today. My first book was published in 2019. It was called A Bend in the Stars, and it was historical fiction set in 1914 Russia, and it was the story of a scientist racing Einstein to prove relativity. And then he goes missing, and his sister, who is Russia's first female surgeon, goes after him, and she's the hero, and she finds him. So it's very much linked to Atomic Anna over here, because this is also set, well, this is set in the Soviet Union. And this is really the story of three generations of women. It's grandmother, mother, and daughter who work together in order to build a time machine that they use to stop Chernobyl. But really it's about saving their family. And it's about, the bonds of grandmother, mother, and daughter, the generations of women, and what they have to do as they move from the Soviet Union to America and how they survive.
just a quick aside, have you been to the Soviet Union, or have you been to Russia, or?
So my family is actually from there. And I grew up with these great aunts who were at my house very often, who hated it, right? They always would say, we left for a reason. We're not going back. And I grew up not being allowed to talk about our time in Russia, talk about our family, or hear any of it, because we're Americans. And so I've never been, because I still have their voice in my head, even though they've passed, but they, saying we left for a reason. We're not going back. But of course, I've always been obsessed with it, and just reading everything I can devour about Russia and the Soviet Union and why our family left, right? Trying to piece that together. And from what I found, it really was that terrible. I feel very lucky that they left and the life that they left. But here we are in America.
Interesting. Actually, my next question kind of goes right into that. And what was the inspiration for Atomic Anna?
Back in 1986, I was sitting on the couch going to watch the nightly news with these two great aunts of mine. They were sisters. My own grandmother died when I was very young. And these great aunts, we turned on the TV, and I had to adjust the antenna. You probably remember those days, right? To be there for the 6 o'clock news. And it comes on, it's April, that Chernobyl has reactor number 4 has melted down. This is a Chernobyl disaster. And I sat there watching the news that night thinking, what a horrible accident. That was a little girl. And it just really changed the way I thought about grown-up accidents and how scary the world could be, how terrible science could be in the end, amazing and wondrous, and yet terrible if you're not careful. And my one aunt turned to the other aunt, and she says to her, if they had a woman in charge at Chernobyl, this never would have happened. And I just always had those voices in my head and that memory of Chernobyl melting down in 86. And I know it sort of came together as I was looking at the 2016 retrospectives of what happened in Chernobyl, what it looked like today. And I had my aunts, and I wrote the character Anna from Atomic Anna, right? Anna Burkova is the scientist. She is that engineer that my aunts had said, right, if only she had been there. And so she is the one really with the idea, with the concept of the time machine, who's convinced that if she only can build it, she can stop Chernobyl, she can save all those people. And along the way, she realizes she can save her family too.
Very interesting. So what kind of research went into this book?
A lot of research, and then also, the standard looking through books and magazines and watching movies and sort of pulling up what I could, but also a lot of talking to people, and really digging into the second wave feminist movement. So as I mentioned, there are 3 generations of women in this book. We have Anna Burkova, who is born right on the cusp sort of the Russian Revolution into what becomes the Soviet Union. And she grows up in the Soviet Union, becomes one of their premier scientists and engineers. And she has a child, Molly, and she doesn't keep the child. She actually sends Molly with her best friend Yulia off to America. They're refuseniks. That's Jews living in the Soviet Union who were refused permission to leave, but then they find a way to escape. And so Molly grows up in America knowing that her birth mother had rejected her. Although her mother that raises her, Yulia, and her father love her to death, right? She has an amazing home. She's growing up with this terrible feeling that her birth mother didn't want her. And she's also growing up in the heart of the second wave of feminism. So we're talking Gloria Steinem, right? Shirley Chisholm, Bella Abzug, right? This beautiful moment where a lot of things are at the forefront of, on the front page of the newspapers. Sadly, some of the things we're seeing again today, but a part of this second wave of feminism really included comic books. We don't talk about comic books much, but Trina Robbins, who's a character in the book and in real life, was really the head of the women's comics movement, and that's with an X, and this idea that we're going to change the way we see women, we draw women, we portray women. And I got to read a lot of her comic books, a lot of her comics, her involvement in the comics movement, which I absolutely adore. And then my character Molly becomes a comic book artist, and she draws comic books that she uses to communicate, between the generations. She'll drop off messages in these comic books to her daughter Raisa and to her mother Anna, and they're used in between the two. So I got to do a lot of comic book research, which was absolutely amazing and fun. I mean, there are comics in this book, and I talk about comic books, but it is not a comic book lover's book, to be clear, right? You don't have to read comic books to like this book, but they're in the background, just as they were in the second wave of feminism, right? So one of the big things that Trina Robbins pushed for, and a lot of women, these artists working on new comics, was this idea that they wanted to stop putting women in refrigerators. Because up until that point, I mean, this is so crazy, but you would read about women in fiction, in comic books, being thrown into refrigerators and fighting over men. And that's just insane, right? It's like mind blowing. And so these women were fighting to change that narrative and to pull the women out of the refrigerators. And that's what Molly is doing, and this book is doing, is shining a light on strong, smart women. And you could be an engineer like Anna, you could be a mathematician like Raisa, or you could be an artist like Molly. Those are the three generations, and that's what they're concentrating on.
Very interesting. So what is your favorite research story?
My favorite research story probably has to do with Trina Robbins, because, like I said, she's written so many books. She has really chronicled the history of women in comics and drawing. And I actually then reached out to her, and I wrote to her to say what a fan I was. And I couldn't get to her directly. I had to go through her publisher, who then finally gave me her email. And then I heard back from her, and I got to send her a really early copy of Atomic Anna long before it was published. And she wrote back to me and said that she loved it. And that was pretty amazing. I've got to say, that was pretty awesome.
That's great.
I actually have one more story kind of like that, which is that I write a lot about relativity, Einstein's theory of relativity, and this question of what is time. So in both of my books, A Bend in the Stars and Atomic Anna, I asked, what is time? Einstein has a lot to say about that. And as I describe some of that work and a little bit of Einstein, as I dug into the research, I found this amazing teacher. His name is Dan Burns. He's teaching out in California, and he would put up his classroom demonstrations, his high school demonstrations up on YouTube, and I could watch them and learn from him. And he was amazing. So I also wrote to him to thank him. And we've become friends too. So it's been really fun to find these random people. I spoke to other physicists, lots of other physicists actually, but there was something about these connections, I don't know, that you make randomly sometimes that just click, and it's pretty awesome.
That's very interesting. And yet you're not a scientist by
by training? No, not at all. But I love science, and all science, and Einstein in particular, starts in philosophy, right? And ideas and thoughts. What is time was a more philosophical question than mathematical. And he came to math. He came to realizing it had to do with light and that time is relative. But he started off with the bigger question of, why do we care about time? Because really time is made up. right? Minutes, seconds, hours. It's just a convention that we've all agreed upon, doesn't exist in nature. And yet we run our entire lives around time, right? That's how we knew when to be here today, at what time, when we were going to meet. It worked out because we agree on the clock and the date, right? The calendar. That is crazy. It's all made up. And so Einstein talks a lot about that. Philosophers have talked about that for a long time. And that is something I'm pretty interested and obsessed with, is this idea of us running off of time. So yeah, so that's in there.
Wow. So what was the biggest challenge that you had in putting out Atomic Anna?
I mean, I think writing, so Atomic Anna there's time travel in the book, although it's not a classic sci-fi book. So if you like Time Traveler's Wife or Outlander, sort of sci-fi or time travel light in that sense. But anytime you do time travel, you're moving back and forth, right, from one time to the other. It can get a little complicated. You have to keep track of the dates. And not only do you have to keep track of things like making sure your character has the same, eye color or the same hair color throughout, but you also have to make sure that they're in the right date and time. So that got a little tough. And I had some pretty extensive spreadsheets that I used to keep track of all that time travel.
Wow, okay. So what character, was there a character that you loved the most or hated the most in Atomic Anna?
Yeah, no, I love them all. I mean, they're all real people to me. And you dig in to write a character, you have to really know them and love them. Yes. And even if you know they make bad choices and they do things you don't agree with, right? And you might not like what they do, I still love them. I mean, they're still my favorite characters. Yep. So, one day if I'm really deep into Anna, I might say, oh, I just loved Anna, right? And I can't stop obsessing over Anna. But the next day I'm writing about her daughter, Molly, in comic books, and I'm like obsessed with that. And then the next day I'm on to Raisa, who grew up in America. She was this math prodigy. And I can't stop thinking about her. And I'm like, she's the one that I love, so it just depends on the day. And so I guess what that comes to in the end is I love them all equally.
Okay, that's great. I think you should.
Actually. Yeah. I mean, it's very hard to write a character if you don't love them, right? You have to feel an emotion for them or it's not, you as my reader, you're not going to believe me if I don't get to know them that well.
That's true. I mean, even some of the villains in stories, you have to love them or hate them, but Yeah. I mean, but you have to appreciate, but you still love them.
Right. You have to appreciate all their layers, right? No one is just evil. There's something driving that. There's something behind it. What is Absolutely. It? And you have to really dig into that as the writer.
Absolutely. So what else can we expect from you in the future?
So I'm working on my next novel, but I'm not quite ready to talk about that yet. So Stay tuned.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. A lot of writers.
But thank you for asking.
Talk about it. Okay. All right. Now I have some questions, excuse me, about on your being a writer. What is your favorite part of being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
I mean, I just love that I get to make stuff up, right? That I can write an entire world and dream up these entire characters, right? Build them a house, build them a life that is just made up. I mean, I remember when I used to take history classes or English classes, right? And writing these essays, and you always have to go back to the exact right evidence and what's there. And facts and evidence are very important. And there's a very important place for those in life. But in my world of fiction, I get to make it up, and I don't have to think twice about saying things. As long as the world makes sense and there's an inner logic to it, your readers will follow you. And so that's a pretty great gift to have. I just love that.
Okay. And what do you consider the most challenging part of the whole writing process, and how do you overcome that?
I mean, that's definitely making up the world, right? Because you have to come up with, like I said, this whole logic, and it has to make sense. And you have to remember where your characters are in the world and how it operates and what rules you made. With Atomic Anna, I have time travel. So I had to come up with the rules for time travel, and my readers, they really hold me to it. And I love that. And I knew they would. So I have what I call the rule of 2. So my characters can only travel for 2 hours wherever they're going. They're pulled back after 2 hours. They can only go to the same place twice, in the same time period twice. So you have these sort of rules, and coming up with all those rules and being consistent in that is very, very challenging sometimes, but also super amazing. Also, I get to just meet some really cool people. There's one other person I wanted to tell you about as a part of my research. So I don't know if you can see, but behind me, I have, we're mirrored here. I have this picture up here and down here. So my characters, Anna and Molly, actually run to build the time machine to a location in what is present day Armenia, was then the Soviet Union, to a cosmic ray station, which is a real thing. So I read about this in the National Geographic and the Guardian. They did these huge essays, these spreads. Toby Smith was this amazing photographer who photographed them. This is a real life Soviet cosmic ray station. Wow. And Toby took these photos. I know. And I read about that and I was like, that's insane. If someone's building a time machine, they have to be at a cosmic ray station. and in real life, it's abandoned. Pretty much. There's like one guy who's there, a caretaker. So I have one caretaker, and you can read in the book how I describe this. And then I don't know if you can see in these pictures, they're these sort of, they look like tree houses, these sort of research outposts over here. Wow. And they're actually inside of those posts are computers like this.
Wow.
So this is actually what, where my character Anna and her daughter Molly, that's where they were. That's where they were doing the work and building the time machine. So that was another really cool part of the research for this book.
That is great.
Yeah, it was really cool. That's on Mount Aragats in Armenia.
You're so lucky to have that information. That's amazing.
I know. I mean, that looks like when you think about some of the things that the Soviets built, that is wild. It's real.
That's great. Yeah. So you were talking about the rules and things like that. I mean, you must have made up the rules before you wrote part of the story, right?
Well, sure, but they change, right? That's another great thing about writing fiction.
Okay.
Right. In nonfiction, you have to stick to the actual rules. In fiction, you can be like, I think I want to make it the rule of 2 instead of the rule of 3, right? Or I want to, whatever it might be, you can change it. I'm actually going to move, Raisa's birth date up by 5 years because I want to make sure she's here on this date so that I can use this. I very much love to write within the real world. So even though my characters are made up, maybe their house is made up, they live in a real world that could have existed at that time period. So, I sort of like to make sure that, like, I'm not going to move the date that Chernobyl melts down, right? That has to stay there. So, there's sort of markers like that in history that I have to hit. So I can just sort of move their birth dates accordingly.
Now, did you write an outline first before you wrote the book?
I did, but just like the rules for time travel and other things change, my outlines always change.
Okay.
But I will say that the readers are always surprised to hear this. The very last scene that I wrote, or the next to last, because there's like sort of a closing chapter, but the very last scene that I wrote takes place during the Russian Revolution. And that was the very first scene that I wrote for the whole book. And it is actually in the book on page like 440 or something. Right. But I wrote it as page 1 and it gets there as 440. So, things change.
Yes, they do, don't they? That's great. So, excuse me, what has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
I mean, I think just writing is itself an adventure. I worked in business before writing. I got my MBA from Harvard Business School. I ran a hedge fund. I had several other businesses, but always was writing at night. I have several books that I've written, tried to query. For those of you who are writers, you understand that, or you might know that's the process where you send out little notes to agents trying to get them to represent you. So I have sent out hundreds of query letters for other books that went nowhere. And I'm not exaggerating. I think every writer will tell you they have lots of books in the drawer that are never going anywhere. So the most amazing adventure was when finally I found Eve Aderman at WME. And it was like, yes, yes, it's gonna happen.
That's great. So what is the greatest lesson that you've learned thus far in your writing career?
I mean, you just have to keep trying, right? Like I said,
hundreds
of rejections. And that's just part of being a writer. I mean, being a person, you get rejected all the time. every
Mhm.
day, right? You just have to get up every day again, try again. If this novel was terrible, move on, put it in the drawer. And it hurts. It does hurt because when you're writing something, if you're going to spend 300, 400 pages on it, you have to think it's brilliant while you're in it. But then to step back and for no one else to like it, it hurts. But then you have to realize that, and you have to move on and keep going.
Oh, is that the main piece of advice that you would give to other writers, or do you have other pieces of advice?
Just right. I mean, I don't believe in writer's block. I think it is very hard and scary to write every day, but it's also a muscle that you can exercise. And if you just get up and start writing every day, I mean, you'll hear lots of famous big writers say this, that it is much easier to fix a terrible page than not to have a page at all. So even if you're going to write today and it's going to be terrible, just write anyway. Whatever you have, if you give yourself an hour a day or 8 hours a day, make it 8 terrible hours, 1 terrible hour. The next day might be better, but at least you can fix it. Because once you start getting into it, the story might come. So you might find that by page 100, you found your groove finally, right? And then you're going to cut 1 through 99. Well, who cares? Because by 100, you're good. You've got a good story. So keep going.
Great. So are there any groups or clubs or organizations that you'd recommend to other authors that might have helped you in your career?
Yeah, so I was a member of the Novel Incubator. That's this 1-year program out of Grub Street, which is held in Boston. And I spent a year working on the novel that became A Bend in the Stars there. So it's a group of 10 students, and we meet once a week. And you have to apply with a full draft of a novel. And I spent a whole year revising A Bend in the Stars in that class. And it was an unbelievable, amazing, hard, fun year. And I came out of it, and then I went to the Muse in the Marketplace, which is their annual conference, and back when it was held in person. And that's where I met my agent. But it took that whole year, right, of working on that draft and coming to it. And then actually I spent another whole year working on it with Eve at WME, and she brought in a couple of other agents, and they all read through it and they all gave me comments before she went out to sell it. So I highly recommend Grub Street, the Novel Incubator. There are writers groups like that all over the country. So look for one wherever you may live, wherever you are. They're all over, and you can find them. Some of them are even online, and you should join.
Great. Okay, now I have some questions about you as a person. What's one thing that most people don't realize about you?
That I've been writing my whole life. Most people think, oh, it's her first book. Well, maybe she's been working on that book for 10 years or whatever, right? But I mean, I've really been writing books my whole life. And I think very, very, very few writers are just an overnight success. It might seem like they came out of nowhere and they're amazing, but actually they've been working for 10, 15, 20, 30 years on writing.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. I think you're right. I think a lot of people may not write it down on paper, but they're always coming up with stories.
Yeah, for sure. And that's another part of writing. Like, so a lot of writers will go for a walk after they write. Instead of trying to write on the page, they'll think through by walking. And a lot of people believe that movement, right, just walking or running, whatever it is you might do, that's going to, move you into your story.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Okay, what is or are your passions when you're not writing, and how do you make time for the hobbies and things that you love?
I mean, I read a lot of books.
Mm-hmm.
I read a lot of books.
That's one thing that authors should do.
Yes. And I feel like the more I read, the better writer I am, and they inspire me. So I spend a lot of time reading books. And then I also interview authors. So I have a podcast. It's called Debut Spotlight with Rachel Barenbaum. And I get debut authors, although now I've been doing it for long enough that a lot of the authors are no longer debut. Sometimes I get, the same author comes to me for their second book or third book. So that's pretty amazing. And just talking to other writers is so inspirational. Hearing their advice, like, how do you do it every day? How do you wake up and write every day? But how does that work for you? And it's just been really inspiring. And I really encourage writers out there and even readers to connect with other writers, right? Because as a writer, I love it when readers email me or contact me and, tag me on Instagram, TikTok, wherever. I love it. Engage with the book, and writers too. We all love to talk to each other, get advice, talk about, well, how did this go? How did that go? What did you do in this situation? It's super helpful. So I spend a lot of time reaching out to writers. I love them.
Great. Okay. And what does your writing space look like? And what do you need to have with you? I mean, do you need to have food or drink, or do you prefer music, silence?
Yeah, I write quietly. I write in a quiet space, and I have multiple screens for my days of trading stocks. I have, I always have a couple of things going, like an outline screen. And then, this screen will have the previous 50 pages. This will have the next 50 pages, whatever it is, because you go back and forth, or I go back and forth a lot to try to make things consistent. When you make small changes in a book, you need to go back and make sure they fall throughout. So.
Okay, so do you have coffee or water or whatever with you all the time?
I drink a lot of tea. So I'll have that or water. I'm not so particular about any of that. I just need quiet and multiple screens.
Okay, that sounds good. And writers often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions with them to help them with their work.
Yes.
And do you have any, and do they help you or hinder you?
Both. I feel like he takes a lot of time. I have a dog, Zisha. I love him very much. He's pretty much always sitting at my feet. He's listened to every book that I've written since, he's 7. So in the last 7 years. And before that, we had another dog who also listened. So, I'm a huge dog lover, and I spend a lot of time with him, but, he also has his demands. So he needs to, have his water and his walks and everything. So, but I love him and he's great. And Zisha is my constant companion and often barking in the background when people are talking and when I'm doing interviews.
Great.
So,
I have 2 more quick questions for you. One is, where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And of course, I have to plug Annie's. You can get Rachel's books at Annie's Bookstop of Worcester. And you can call us at 508-796-5613 or email us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. So where else can people get your books?
I love it. Yes, go to Annie's. And if you can't make it to Annie's, go to your local bookstore. Atomic Anna is available. I'm on the mirror here. Everywhere books are sold. You can go to my website, rachelbarenbaum.com. You can find it anywhere you buy your books. It's everywhere. Amazing. I love my publisher, Hachette, Grand Central. They got the book everywhere. So
great. And my last question is, how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
Thank you. Well, first, thank you for asking and thank you for having me. I love Annie's. Everyone should go to Annie's. But you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Goodreads. I'm on all of them. If you go to my website, rachelbarenbaum.com, you'll find the links for all of them, and you can follow me on all social media. I'm everywhere.
Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. I really enjoyed speaking with you. And hopefully sometime you'll be able to come to Annie's.
Yes, I would love it.
Area.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun.
You're welcome. All right. And we will be seeing you.
Thank you.
Thank you.